Hey there, welcome to episode 8 of The Sherveen Show, where we connect the dots between tech, startups, business, and society. And today, it's going to be a conversation with Katie, the founder and CEO of Viv. She's building a brand, a startup, a company that is redefining period care. As they put it, it's earth-friendly period care delivered to your door. There's a focus on sustainability, health, and accessibility in a way that feels long overdue. It's mission-driven, it's modern, it's direct-to-consumer, and we talk about it all. The initial product development, the use of social media for growth, pitching this to majority male VCs, competing with legacy brands, and so much more. I learned a ton in this conversation. I hope you do too. Wherever you're watching or listening to this, please subscribe. Your support means a whole lot. With that, here's the conversation with Katie Diasti, founder, CEO of Viv. So start us off though, tell us, what is Viv broadly and specifically? So broadly being mission, future, company, and then what is it offering today to customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are on a mission just to make better for people with periods. And we are really dedicated to having truly toxin-free products that are also sustainable, but something that is really easy and approachable to use. Approachability is something I think is so key in this space. And we created a line that no matter where you're at in your period journey or sustainability journey, there's a product that feels approachable and exciting to use in a very judgment-free way. And so we have both reusable options that could be more zero waste, that are menstrual cups that are more beginner-friendly. And that's been a really interesting product for us because it's gone viral on TikTok a few times. And a big factor is that it's easier to remove, which was something for me that was really daunting, was like how to remove cup. And so that was one of the first problems we wanted to solve. We also do biodegradable bamboo pads and liners. Even the wrapper can be home composted and is completely plastic free, which is super different than traditional products in space. Most pads contain a ton of plastic and can take up to 800 years to break down. And Viv pads break down in 150 days and are completely plastic free. So in terms of impact there, that was so key. But using more innovative fibers like bamboo, that is way softer and more absorbent. So it just makes so much sense for something like a menstrual pad, but is also reducing so much agri waste with being a more sustainable fiber. And then we also have organic cotton tampons with BPA-free applicators that if you're looking to just make a more toxin-free choice, that's something that is a lot more approachable and sustainable to use. So that's our full product line at the moment.
Super interesting from two perspectives. And I want to go and actually use that to ask, when you think about customer questions, right, that you receive, are people coming to you for and you kind of adjust this a little bit, but I want to hear more about it. Are people coming to you for the reasons you expect? Because I think when you're like mission driven or you have a personal problem, you'll build a product and you have your preconceived notions of here's what's going to work. And that might still be working, but there's this other thing that you didn't realize that becomes part of your movement. Like when you're in there, are you getting the consumer you expect or are you getting something different?
When I first launched the brand, I thought we were going to get the hyper-sustainable, kind of like trendy consumer. And we have two different consumers coming into the brand that I wasn't expecting. One being the super hormone health-focused consumer. And that was a space that, I learned while growing the brand. And we worked with these, what were like micro-influencers at the time. They had like less than 10K followers, and they were 3 sisters that were hormone health coaches. And they were one of our first influencers that we sent product to. And they sold so many cups. And it was so many of people who were looking to reduce toxin exposure because toxins are endocrine disruptors and can cause hormone imbalances. And so they wanted to try a cup. Now, those creators have almost 200,000 followers, and we've grown with them, and we're one of their first paid partners. And we really learned how big the hormone health community was for us, and the lack of education around the 4 phases of the cycle and how to support your body throughout an entire month and not just, the few days of menstruation. And that has now unlocked the future of the Viv brand and where we want to go. But on our social following, we have a really young audience. So one of our most viral TikToks are simply how to insert a tampon and like what is a period. And we get thousands of comments from young people asking follow-up questions on those videos, or even saying like, thank you so much for making this. Like, I just learned how to use tampon for the first time and I have a swim meet tomorrow. And those are the kinds of things that have created more of like a health education moment for us, and realizing, young people are turning to TikTok to learn about their bodies. I mean, everyone is turning to TikTok to learn about their bodies. I know I like self-diagnose myself on TikTok all the time. And
yeah, sometimes against your will, you're being diagnosed on TikTok.
Like, oh my gosh, do I have that thing that just popped up on my feed? And I know when I was younger, I wish I had a tool like that to be able to research so many things that felt a little bit more intimate or really personal or scary when you're young. But we didn't have those tools. But now there's just so much on the internet, and we want to make sure that we're providing like really high quality education that's accurate, but also in a way that's speaking to their voice and tone, that's also empowering. And that's been a new audience I wasn't expecting. Like, I wasn't expecting a ton of 11, 12, 13-year-olds to be like so dedicated to the Viv brand at first.
It's a product that is deep in routine, is like a way I'd put it, right? It's like on behavior that is core to someone, biologically, obviously. Menstrual products in general, I'm going to assume, you tell me if I'm wrong, there's probably not brand loyalty, but there's like, again, routine loyalty. Yeah. And like a woman doesn't want to complicate what is working for her. Again, tell me if I'm wrong about that. So like, A, edit me. B, with that in mind, I'm curious how much of that is like the challenge, right? Because you're talking about these younger audiences, and maybe you can build a business entirely on them, and that might be the strategy. Mm-hmm. But I assume the other half of it, or, if you're attempting go to market elsewhere, is to suggest to people, this thing is very routine for you. To disrupt it might be really inconvenient, but you should anyway. And we want to be the ones to like get you to not go to CVS and pick up the exact same thing you've been picking up for 10 years.
Yeah. And when you go down an aisle, like in a CVS, it's like 15 facings of Tampax, and still the natural section is fairly small and still needs quite a bit more disruption. And I do think there maybe 4 years ago was a lot more loyalty in the category than there is now, but there's this new wave of education happening. And I think consumers are now more educated than ever before. And in our case, that's a benefit because they're actually questioning what's in traditional tampons today. And with anyone who's not familiar with what are in traditional tampons, the same chemicals you would find in Roundup weed killer are also in those tampons today. And so those headlines are starting to circulate. People are starting to ask questions. People are now seeking natural. And we're seeing that start with food. Everyone was looking for natural alternatives for what we were consuming. We saw it in the beauty space. Clean beauty is massive, and we're finally seeing it trickle into the personal care category. We've seen it in oral care, and it's finally reaching the period care aisle. So I think the consumer education is key, but we also have to do quite a bit of education ourselves, which is something we love to do and something I think our brand is exceptional at. So that has been one of the benefits, is how do you educate someone and around the full entire space without making them just so scared of what they were using prior, but leading them to a new checkout of trying something better at the same time is a lot more of an art, and something that I think if your brand can do right, they're going to actually be able to convert customers to your space, even in a really brand loyal category.
Well, that idea of also just like it starts in food, it really was interesting. What you just said of like, oh, like that might be the thing I didn't realize is how much of this can be carried to other themes, right? Because otherwise I feel like it'd be so difficult to get someone from scratch to start thinking about this with this product, right? It's like, okay, there are other areas of sustainability, right? But then actually that might be the exact conversation someone wants to have. On the toxins point, I'm curious, and I asked this question not knowing at all about this particular set. Would you say, and I know there's like a competitive aspect to this, but would you say like those concerns that people have will it turn out to be, hey, people want to go natural because they just kind of want to avoid unknowns that they don't need to engage with? Or do you think there's real danger that like people aren't aware of in these traditional products? I think there's like, it's interesting thing about food in that way. A lot of people, I think recently have decided to stop vilifying food, but instead say, okay, but I want to avoid this anyway for my own health or whatever, even with alcohol, things like that, right? It's choice-based as opposed to saying this thing is evil and no one should touch it. It's more like, okay, we just should touch it far less than we are. We shouldn't accept it as much. Which thing is happening here?
I think it's all about wanting to feel better. Like people today just want to feel better. When you're eating something we don't know what's in it, or it has things that are, considered the bad chemicals or foods or oils or whatever it may be, sometimes you just don't feel as good, whether you want to completely remove it from your life or not. we've gotten so much feedback around by switching to Viv tampons because they're organic cotton, they have way less cramping, that their periods feel shorter. By switching to a cup, that it relieves a lot of the pressures and reduces a lot of the pain for them. And that's something that has been such a helpful insight for us. It's like going natural, you're not only paying for like, yes, this is going to be better for my overall hormone health and not having those endocrine disruptors in one of the most absorbent parts of my body, but it's also going to make an easier period for me, which means I can do XYZ, a million more things, feel comfortable on my period. Like that, I think, is what is going to actually convert a customer to using it. And just like how consuming something that might be a little bit natural or better for you is going to make you feel better.
Makes total sense. Let's zoom in now to the product a little bit. Let's first start at the early portion of it. So take us to the like build of the first thing, whether it was a prototype, whether it was a mold, whatever like is the story. Because I feel like every founder in some sort of product space, direct to consumer space, has the like, here's my initial version and the story behind it. What's the initial version of this look like? How did it come together?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have the funniest stories around me like trying to build a tampon at home. And I was really fascinated by alternative fibers. Like I thought that was the future. It made so much sense to me. I was so confused why no one was using alternate fibers in this category for so long.
What is an alternate fiber?
So instead of like the traditional, like right now, traditional tampons and pads and such are made of like either rayon or just cottons. And it's like, okay, why are we not going beyond just these like cotton itself? Like what else can we do? And that's using like hemp fiber, bamboo fiber, like these other types of fibers that are way more sustainable, but also higher performing. And I remember ordering like a box on the internet of hemp and bamboo fiber that came in a box from this guy in California that like had a farm. And I just opened the box and just purely just like bamboo fiber. And when I did this accelerator program in college, I had to bring in like an MVP. And I was like, I don't have a medical device ready to go to show to people after a 3-month, like once a week, accelerator. So I just brought a bowl of hemp fiber and put it in there. And I had people come and touch it. And I was like, see how much softer that is? And they were like, wow, this is a really soft fiber. And we're showing like how absorbent the fiber is. And we're like, we're going to turn this into menstrual care. And we're like, okay. But
you have to have a lot of imagination in that moment.
You really did. We just had images of what the brand would look like in a bowl. It was chaotic. And shocked that was like approval for that course in that accelerator. But I went really deep into like going to my former professors, and one was a material science professor and I was a business student. Like I had no business walking into that science building at the time and going up to her during her office hours. Like I stalked when her office hours were and I was like, hey, I'm trying to make better period care. Like, what do you think I should do? And she just sat there and riffed with me over different things that would be better options and alternatives, and was so willing to just like help because I just approached her and asked these questions. And that started the whole evolution of the brand. And my overall thing is like, you can Google way more than you think you can when you're trying to launch a product and create a product. Because I was able to go deep and find these manufacturing partners myself and got samples sent to me from different countries all the time. And I remember it was just me at the time that was starting the business. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I need to like bring in friends to test these products. But when you're only getting a period once a month, that doesn't, create a lot of efficiency in terms of timeline. And something that was very chaotic that I was doing was I was messing with my birth control at the time so that my period would come faster or sooner when the product samples would arrive so that I could test them in time to then give feedback and press go faster on manufacturing runs, which I don't recommend for anyone else.
That is founder dedication to early product discovery. Wow.
Like, samples arrived. Let's go. We got to try it. And I was like, wow. I have to try it myself to know it's going to work. And
it's just, by the way, I want to comment on what I'm experiencing, which is like, I would not have thought, like, there are very few product spaces where you have to mess with your own biology as part of the testing. Like, that's fascinating. While you're doing it, how sure were you that you were going to like continue on this path in that moment? I want to hear more about how it moved forward from there, but like, were you like, I'm doing this, therefore I must, or were you still like, I'm just testing and I'm willing to, kind of test on me?
Because at that time when I was getting the samples in, I had just graduated from college in 2019 and was jumped like 5 days later into an accelerator program. Like went home, packed up my stuff, went back and like to Boston and started this accelerator. And it was just like me and my computer and these random samples against the world. And I remember still having a job offer lined up for the fall. And in my head, I was just not even thinking about that job. I was like, okay, that's a later problem and I'll figure it out. But I was, of course, spending like more than full-time hours trying to build this business, but ended up having to like set milestones for myself as I got closer to that start date, which I was like picking the latest start date possible. I moved my start date back like 2 or 3 different times. And I had set a number for pre-orders and was like, okay, if I hit this pre-order number amount, then I'm going to renege the job offer and not go. And we like surpassed that number by quite a bit. And I felt confident enough to like make that call, which I was so scared to call and be like, I know I signed a contract and I told you I was going to come and I'm actually not coming to your company. And it was actually a 20-second phone call and they did not care at all. And I was like, okay, this was a sign that I'm on the right path and I was not going to be making the impact that I know I wanted to make with my first role.
Right. So, you go to an accelerator out of college. You and I were talking before this, and I made fun of the fact that you haven't really had a boss other than internships.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a moment, then we'll zoom back into the product. When you start, did that worry you? Did that worry probably family or friends? How do you think about it now, also several years later? Being obviously,
yes.
Some people find out they're founders and have worked. Some people, have never had a boss. I think Zuckerberg didn't have one probably.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel like then the amount of almost like blissful ignorance of like the confidence that had was so key in building a company. Like you need to be a little bit delusional to start a company.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
Well, just to like grow a company, I think your levels of delusion have to be higher. You can start one, but
yeah, it's definitely higher than the average person. And that is something I definitely had. And if I had worked in traditional corporate America, gone through those roles, saw the hierarchy of having a boss, I think I would have lost a lot of that like wonderful delusion that now, having run a company for several years now, it's definitely grounds you and you're like, oh, that would have been nice to experience, like what it's like to go through a performance review or some of these traditional things to then be able to in exchange do that. But hey, I think being really dedicated to your personal growth and self-growth as a founder is also key for the sake of your team members. And I'm the youngest person on my team today, and they still have the utmost respect for me, even though they've been in roles where they've had bosses and they've had very different career paths. And that's something that I think when you're hiring, it's like ensuring that whoever you're bringing on has so much respect for you, but you're also creating an environment that makes them feel really confident in their role, like despite what your past experience might be.
We're on this detour, so let's stay on a little bit of talent and team. It's something that I love to hear every founder talk about. What have you learned about building teams? What have been some of the key inflection points that have taught you the things that you've learned?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's one of the hardest things I think we've had to do is build a team, and I'm so lucky today that I think my founding team is so strong and so supportive, and we're each other's biggest cheerleaders, which is hard to do. And, your team is so small. It's like, who is giving you that kudos? Who's giving you that pat on the back? And it has to be from each other and it has to be from yourselves. And, but it was not always like that. And I've had like really unfortunate times of having to like let people go that were really, really close to me. And that's like one of the most heart-wrenching experiences. But I've learned that one of the key things is ensuring that anyone who's joining the team is there because they're so passionate about solving the problem as well, which seems like a no-brainer, but I think a lot of people get caught up on the idea of wanting to be part of a really early stage startup or wanting to have the word co-founder in their title, but don't actually know what that means or the energy and dedication it takes to put into that. But also like actually caring about the people they're serving and the customer base, because at the end of the day, like being a startup founder is really hard. Being an early stage employee at a startup is hard. But if you're so excited about the why and you're getting up every day, like so excited to serve that customer, that's going to push you through. And something I heard early on that made me a lot more confident in my journey is that if you had to get up every day for the rest of your life and serve like this exact audience, would you still be happy doing that? And for me, that's a no-brainer. Like my life mission is to like make the lives of women and people with periods better. And so that was what made my why like so clear, and ensuring that anyone coming into the team felt that same exact why too.
The point you're making about, kind of that care for a customer, I think is so key, because it's like that can help with the other problems. Not that you want to, hire someone who doesn't know what it takes or things like that, but like that can be so overriding, because that helps you make choices as a person when you're waking up or, deciding whether to send an email at the end of the day or whatever it might be. It's like, if you really care about the outcome on the other side, then you're going to go that extra mile. Yes. And that startup, the extra mile is the default mile. You have to go the extra mile.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So let's zoom back out. Where were we in your journey? I think we had the sample product that starts to work. Yeah. So tell us, take us from there.
Yeah. So I mean, we went from pre-orders to me shipping product out of my apartment. I had like 25 large cases arrive at my tiny walk-up in Boston, and I hand brought them up the stairs and shipped them out from the first batch. And from the beginning of Viv, like we've touched every part of the business, for better or for worse. And we went from there to eventually growing into raising a little capital and getting a small warehouse space that we stored all our product, shipped all of our product, and worked out of. And that was such an insightful part of building a company, because I really did see every aspect. Like we were sitting there working on marketing to get products in. We were working on getting a couple retailers at the time. And then you're visibly seeing product move. Like you're seeing a pallet go in a truck, or you're physically putting the boxes together at the end of the day and learning what the trends are, which I think is not the norm anymore. When anyone's starting a D2C brand, there's a million other startups that help you do it in a way that's like really convenient. And you can pretty much do everything from your computer and never like touch cardboard. And I think that is something that is so valuable that I got to do. And I encourage more people to try as well.
You should touch cardboard. That should be like a thing you start having as your slogan.
Yeah.
Well, I talk about it all the time. I remember early on at Agency, we provide Hollywood-style representation to tech talent. And in the first year, one of the first arguments my co-founder and I had was whether or not we should take people outside of our core demographic, because we knew we wanted to target mid to C-level people in tech. But I said, hey, A, we don't have customers yet. We shouldn't, turn people away. B, I'm curious about whether these are feasible or viable. And still to this day, and he eventually, I won him over on this subject, our best muscles were built serving our worst customers. As in, they've, when we got a client who was a senior software engineer, our service would work excellently and we would make money and be great, but it was easy, versus, we took a project manager who was looking for a remote job in 2019, and that was super hard. And so that forced us to build like an automation engine for a certain portion of our process, right? It's like you have to build those muscles, and it feels like that's the same thing that you're identifying, is if you don't build them, you probably just have like 1,000 A, blind spots, and B, if something goes wrong and you have to rely only on other people, that can probably be costly.
Yeah. We can go to our now 3PLs and fulfillment centers and warehouses, and we're like, we know exactly what the process is because we've done it all. Like we have experienced all those steps, and like we've set up Amazon and all these things firsthand. So then now when working with an Amazon agency, like we know the lingo, we know what is being said. And I think the scariest thing for founders is like going into a meeting and having no clue what's being talked about at your own company. And that part can be daunting. Sometimes it's good if people are have more expertise than you, but you want to have some base understanding of what's happening.
Speaking of what's happening in that moment, you mentioned it's a medical device, which is like a thing that like, I don't know what the implications are. Teach us, what are the implications, and how did that hit you in the early journey?
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like if I knew everything I know now, it would have been a lot more daunting to start this company. And I think that's the case for probably a lot of founders, but our products are low-grade medical devices, type 1 and type 2 medical devices. And we had to work with FDA lawyers at one point, and every year we FDA register as a brand that resells medical devices. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize and know about the space, that it is a somewhat regulated category, even though, the products are approved and might not be still the best for you, which is really fascinating. But that was a big hurdle for us in the beginning, because we realized that it was going to be a little bit of a capital intensive company to start at first, like buying inventory upfront, getting FDA approval, these things that, even our packaging had to be reviewed by FDA lawyers. And those were not things that were in my scrappy startup mindset. I was very much like, let's do everything as bootstrapped as possible before we launch. Like, let's keep things small. And then had to really look in the mirror and be like, okay, it is okay to take on some capital. It is okay to raise, because you need to get over this next step. And we ended up having to raise capital to be able to fully launch the brand due to some of these regulations.
I'm really afraid of my next question. What's the dumbest thing that you had to hear? I ask it of every founder who is either a female or who has a company that targets females, and they always have a story.
Yeah.
During your fundraising process, I want to know what your dumb VC story is.
I get a lot of, it's so funny because now I've changed my mindset. I'm like, I love when people ask questions. And I think the best investors are maybe even asking those dumb questions more so than being like, let me take this back to my wife. Let me take this back to my girlfriend. I'm like, no, you're the one investing. So you ask me the question, even if you think it's intimate. It's if they're the investor, great. If they're not, then I need to hear from you. And one time on a large Zoom call of probably 20 investors and myself, this older woman on the call was like, I do not understand what this menstrual cup thing is. How the heck does this work? She could not wrap her mind around it. And so I had a little prop one on my desk. And so on the Zoom call, I'm using our tube diagram and fully showing someone how to fold, insert, and remove a menstrual cup. And granted, it's this older woman. And then pretty much everyone else on this call was a middle-aged man. And the silence after that moment was something that was really exceptional. But I was like, you're right. You should know exactly how this product is used if you're going to be investing in the company. And, there's those stories that Glossier's founder has told where if they're actually taking the product and rubbing it on their hand, she had a boardroom of all male investors come in, and they would take the product and put it on the hand, and that was the best investor, more so than okay, I'll take these samples back to my wife. It's they're going to see what the product is like firsthand. They might not be the target audience, but the best investors understand that they're not the target audience for every company that's going to be successful.
And to your point about question asking, the curiosity to find out and go, okay, there's something here. Clearly, the job of the investors is to figure out if it's good, not to decide if they're comfortable.
Yeah.
I remember a recent story to your point about taking it back was an investor sending their associate, which happens sometimes for other reasons, but because it was a female-focused product. Hey, I'm going to send my associate. I won't be at the first meeting. That's wild. And it's just kind of shows the seriousness with which we should take these people sometimes. So you had to raise for that initial batch. Let's take a fundraise detour for a second.
Yeah.
So what's been kind of the fundraising philosophy so far? If you can share, how much have you raised? And then what have been the inflection points of deciding whether to raise more capital or not?
Yeah, so we've raised about $1 million to date in pre-seed funding, and we actually did it in kind of 2 tranches. So I was always in the mindset of raise what you actually need. I was always concerned that with excess capital on hand, we too early on in our journey, we'd unknowingly spend it on all of the wrong things. And having exactly what we need to get to that next step, I think has made us a more sustainable business rather than, and maybe it's prohibited really, really fast growth or really cool PR marketing campaigns that could have had us in headlines over other brands. But it's allowed us to actually learn what we needed to do to build a business. And so we've raised about $500K for our first tranche of our pre-seed round, predominantly from angel investors. And I mean, we were pitching with maybe a couple tens of thousands of dollars of revenue, very, very low revenue, and pretty much a pretty deck. We didn't even have our finalized packaging in hand. And I think an early stage investor, they're investing in you. So I think the confidence that they saw in me about the brand, and they knew I was going to make it happen one way or another. And I think that's so key when raising really early on in your journey, is just proving like why you're the person that's going to make this happen. And then we did a follow-on round around 2022 when we got some more retail deals, and that was only about another $500K. And so with that being $1 million to date, but we still now haven't raised since 2022, like early 2022. And now we're like, okay, we're at an interesting inflection point where we're pitching major retailers, or we're expanding door count with a lot of our existing partners. And the reason we're raising is it's simply like survival. We're raising because we know we need to have a certain level of marketing, a certain level of team to actually be successful in our next level of growth. Which is a really nice position to be in, rather than having to chase metrics that you set when you didn't even know like what it was like to get in a retail door, what your velocities would have been on shelf. We have a lot more data behind us going into a new round of funding.
Do you think about the funding for a lot of this as being also about expanding the product line at some point? Because some of this sounds like it's short term. It's about taking advantage of opportunities that are in front of you today that require capital. I assume even like being able to prove that you can have a certain amount of inventory on hand is important to some partners, things like that. How about the portion of it that allows you to not do fun things either? So kind of the middle ground of like the product development that might require more research, especially with some of the stuff you were talking about earlier, right? Where, and you and I were talking about beforehand of like, there's a overall wellness and health aspect here that might get interesting. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. And now understanding so much more about retail than I did in the past, my philosophy is, how can you get your retail buyer promoted, and how can you make their life better and increase the overall category? So when we think about product development, it's going to go hand in hand with really thinking of a retail buyer, the person deciding if you're going to be at a Target or a Whole Foods or a Wegmans or whatever it may be, having them so close to the brand and to the audience that they start suggesting new products to you, because they're the ones making these major decisions. And so we're looking at how can we evolve the period aisle to have things that it's never had before, because it's not, the age of one in, one out for a SKU. Like, we're not trying to cannibalize the traditional brands or the natural brands on shelf. We're trying to create new space that hasn't existed before. And there's no reason that we can't have larger aisles if the demand is there and if we're creating enough of a new exciting category. So thinking of them as both innovation partners has been really key for kind of like product development. And they've come to us and will randomly email us like, hey, had this idea. And we're, for them, kind of this like innovative partner for them. One, because we're a new brand, and two, because we made that really clear from the beginning. In the first meeting, we're like, hey, you let me know what trends you're seeing that you want to try on shelf. And we're going to work to like make that possible, as long as it's aligned with our brand values too. And I'm like been shocked at how much that has then led to expanding our existing SKU count, or actually replacing brands that are discontinuing with more Viv facings instead, because we think of them more as innovative partners. So that's been more of the investment for product development.
What does, insofar as some of the stuff is not like still in the stealth lab, what does the future of period care look like or sound like? And I probably am amongst this crowd, there are half of us probably more ignorant of understanding what that might mean. So tell me, as someone who doesn't engage in these products, but also your customers, like, what does that look like for you as a company? What sorts of products might those be? Yeah.
And it's something we almost like test through our social media, but something that I've become really personally passionate about, and our team is passionate about, is hormone health. And throughout even the process of starting Viv, I learned that I had a hormonal imbalance, and I was diagnosed with PCOS, and learned how to rebalance naturally my cycle, and did so with a lot of like workout syncing and doing certain workouts during different phases of the month, and knowing when I had higher energy, and which phases are even better to be doing speaking events, or which phases would be better to do more creative heads down work. And that's something that we want to empower a lot of women and people with periods to know, like that amount of understanding of their bodies is something that can really transform their careers. And it's not really just about fertility anymore. It's really about feeling your best and, optimizing your health. And we know that a lot of the times, like our world and our work hours were not created with women in mind and our bodies in mind. And so how can we hack it to make us feel better? And a lot of our education on TikTok that's done well is we just had this post where it was, like Spotify day lists, but it was a Spotify day list based on different phases. And it blew up because it was not only like educational, but it was really fun and entertaining. But we're like, wow, we're also helping people understand their different phases of their cycle. And so when we think about Viv, right now we're supporting you during your few days of your actual period, but we want to support you during your full month-long cycle. Right now it's starting with education, it's starting with content, but what are other products that might have supported your body that, we already use day to day in our own life that maybe it's related to period pain, but also could be new categories like wearable wellness is something that we're diving deeper into that isn't really a category yet, but is something that we think we could be movers in. So that's the stealthy mode we're in right now.
I like the sneak peek. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have one more question before I'll go to the crowd for questions. One of the things that's interesting is we've talked about retail and how you think of them as an innovation partner. You obviously have direct-to-consumer e-commerce, subscription. It sounds like there's some other, really interesting products that might be on the way. How do you think about the balance of where you want revenue to come from, where it is hoisted upon you, where marketing leads you? Because I think this is like, again, going to my first question, like what you spend your time on can change based on this, right? Because there might be an opportunity where you become an entirely retail, you would have to decide, but like if retail becomes your focus, or is a subscription your focus, is product line expansion your focus? Talk about, kind of the dynamics balancing all of those different stakeholders.
Yeah. And I think about what heightens each other. Like one interesting thing is we've been getting a ton of university inbound lately for universities wanting to buy Viv products in bulk and stock their campuses. And, we're not equipped for B2B sales, but it's something I'm like, okay, I got to learn B2B sales now and figure this out. But one of the benefits is like, this is our major demographic is these university age students. And if we're in universities near our retail partners, like that's just elevating our retail presence too and can create higher velocities and more of that flywheel effect. And if it's something that isn't feeding into each other to help that goal, then it's something we need to be like, okay, is this actually elevating the brand? And you want to think about, less so like, how do I get this brand with as much revenue to hit these goals? But how can I overall like elevate this brand, whether it's for an exit or whether it's to just continue to grow the overall company, and doing other channels and other streams that don't do that is something we've had to like pause on because we're a small startup team and there's only so many hands and it feels insane to say no to opportunities, but it's recently something we've had to do. So overall, it's like, how can we continue to grow Viv as a brand and as a company more so than how can we have X amount more dollars each month?
Something has to feed something else. I like that answer. Awesome. Questions from the crowd? Go ahead.
One thing I'm curious about is at the start you had mentioned working with the three sisters, the creators. And then I saw online you guys have a really strong social media presence as well, which is awesome.
Thanks.
How do you balance that of like continuing to partner with creators and then also like I've seen a lot of new brands like e-commerce brands effectively bringing in creators in-house. How do you consider that? Like, I'm just trying to think about that for these new age like, e-commerce companies.
Yeah.
What to do and what strategy you see work or not work.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I'm really mindful around influencer marketing. We are more in the mindset of like gifting for trial to start. And like early on got the advice, if you can't pay influencers, don't, because it's not worth it. But we have built like a small group of 3 creators that we've been working with since the early days and have built really personal relationships with them where we get on like product development calls or idea brainstorm calls with them and they'll text me ideas or they'll text me the content that's due. And so it's more building longer lasting relationships with fewer creators than, trying to send out these large campaigns to like every New York City influencer. And that's something I think is a lot higher value and higher conversion, especially if you have limited budget early on. I think the other aspect that you mentioned is so interesting around like bringing creators in-house. And I mean, like Waterboy or these other brands are doing that phenomenally well. And people like to recognize a face and get more like loyal to a person. And so if it's this one creator you love and you see them in a brand you love, like naturally there's going to be this alliance, but also has to have the consistency. And so for us, we like to keep like one or two people as like the face of the Viv brand on our social, because then you can become more loyal to seeing them over and over again. It's less confusing than seeing 7 different faces on one feed.
So follow. So to that point, it's less of a let's like see existing creators and then bringing them in versus like sounds like you guys are developing creators or hiring people to work for you.
Yeah, and we've actually done it all in-house with like our founding team or socials thus far. It's like our marketing director who's running our Instagram and our TikTok. And now she is more of like, if you look up menstrual cup tips on TikTok, it's like her face over and over again. And so it is kind of like creating a creator in-house. And never before when she joined this job did she probably think she was going to be like a menstrual cup influencer, but now she is.
Okay.
Wait, random question before we go to the next crowd question. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to a brand that has a big TikTok go-to-market since the TikTok ban. How do you think about that? I'll ask, you don't have to answer politically. How do you think about it as a business? How do you adjust around it? Because it's also, I think, like for a business, it's different than like the influencer side. If a pure influencer can care because of their entire livelihood, for you, right. It's more like a channel that can fall apart, which can happen even for a normal brand. A channel just stops working or gets saturated. But what does TikTok look like for you?
TikTok is operating as normal. Something that's really interesting about our category in TikTok is period care has actually been banned on TikTok Shop. And it's because it was too sensitive of a category. And we learned this directly from the TikTok team and like their TikTok Shop and their ad team. And it's something that, employees internally are trying to fight with higher ups. It's like, this isn't too sensitive a topic because look how many people are turning to learn from this space. And we're trying to be almost like movers and representatives as a brand to then push to change things internally at TikTok and say, hey, look at how many conversions we got from this one video. You could be profiting off of this. And now they're finally moving it to allow period care this June on TikTok. And we haven't seen that before, but it was a lot of us having to like go to higher ups and show them like actual proof of concept and numbers. Which is an exact question about TikTok ban. But I think it's really interesting. We learned that a lot of our content, if it wasn't performing well, was being flagged as unsafe because we were using the word period or tampon or like menstrual or menstruation. And that's something that's just based like purely on internal stigmas because they thought it was like unsafe terminology, which is really fascinating. So there's still a lot of education that needs to happen on the policy side and the internal policy side of TikTok too.
Sure. So I loved hearing you talk about your journey with Viv. I'm definitely, your target consumer, specifically very interested in hormonal health. So that's kind of the angle I would be thinking through things. So just curious about how COVID impacted your journey, because I know you said you started around 2019 developing. So, usually, I think typically I've heard, especially with retail and product focus, there was a lot of disruption in more of a negative way, but I'm curious if, I don't think what this product is specifically would honestly be impacted and where you were at with your journey. And then also I do think that, COVID-19 and just in general, last years, women and people in general are really focused on their health and there's a lot of awareness that's coming to light. So I'm assuming it's honestly beneficial, but just curious.
Yeah, great question. I was so lucky to be very early on in my journey during COVID. I think if I was later stage or like a Series A company, it would have been a lot harder. And it was
because the drop would have been. Is that why you would say that? Because the drop off of like revenue would have been too shocking for the system.
Yes, and having like a larger team and larger distribution being affected. I think our category in particular was supported because so many more people were becoming more mindful of their health and well-being. They had more time to learn about products, and they started buying things that they typically only bought in store online for the first time. And our category in particular was predominantly like 90% of period products are still bought in store. And so that led to like us realizing we needed retail distribution, but we're seeing that start to move towards more people buying period care on Amazon or through Instacart or other online resources, which we started off purely D2C before going into retail. And I think that helped us grow our initial D2C business. But it also was just like an interesting time to be there sitting and innovating. But I don't want to say like COVID helped our business, but it definitely shifted consumer mindset that has led to like making it a better opportunity for us now.
I'm curious about your journey as a female-led company. Given that like less than 2% of VC funding is going to female-led companies, have you noticed that trend shifting since you started your company towards now? Have you noticed like more female-led companies that the market's open for them? Or what's your take on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I think, unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with where we're at economically. And with economic downturn, there tends to be less investment in women, and which is horrifying. And against the stats, like we're seeing that female founders and female execs and CEOs create better businesses based on the numbers and have higher returns, larger exits. And it's something that would make sense to invest in, but it feels riskier because those are less of the investments they've made in the past. And we're definitely feeling that hit. And I think in our category in particular, for so long, we were told this was like too niche of a space and something that we have to combat. It's like, this is half the world's population. Like, it's not too niche. So we have to show that with the numbers and show how large of a market it is. And you know, I go into a meeting assuming that people understand like how massive of an opportunity, and I have to stop assuming that now and go back to those basic stats of like, this is what's in a pad, this is how big the market is, and like it's a $52 billion industry, and comparing that to other industries that are highly invested in is something that I know just drawing parallels in an investor's mind I think is really key, and like doing your due diligence and building community parallel like with other people in your space and networking horizontally I think is really important. People get really caught up in like networking up and finding mentors, but my best and most helpful networking has been with other founders at the exact same stage as me, because then we then make introductions to other investors who they know what we deem like safe investors, that they're not going to ask silly questions and that they actually write checks, and they actually write checks to women. So building that community, I think, is key, like combating that. But definitely something we just need, you know, whether it's we need more women on the investor side or we need like to see more representation is something that I'm not sure what the answer is yet. We'll see.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation. So appreciate you sharing insights on the market, the industry, and the company.